Some wars are pretty long. Think of the 30 Years' War, the 80 Years' War, or the 100 Years' War. That actually spent 116 years. But none of those got anywhere close to this massive war that we're going to try to cover within 20 minutes today. I'll be honest, it's going to be a bit simplified since we basically got 20 minutes divided by 781 years, so 1.5 seconds per year, which also means we're already 30 years behind schedule. But then again, it's not like 8 generations of Christians and Muslims were stabbing each other at all times. Or were they? Let's talk about the Reconquista. Historically Facts, Part 15. Let's travel back to the year 711 to set the stage. Europe is still hungover from the fall of Rome that happened 2 centuries ago, and the Iberian Peninsula, basically today's Spain and Portugal, is run by the Visigoths. On paper, the Visigothic kingdom was wealthy, Christian and centralized, though in reality, like with most medieval kingdoms at the time, it was indeed very brittle and constantly undermined by personal vendettas. North of the Visigothic kingdom, we find the Frankish kingdom, who were essentially the bigger bro in the Gaul region. The kingdoms fought each other before, and during the last deciding battle, the Franks managed to crush the Visigothic army, and even killed their king in battle. Yikes. It did all happen a while ago, so the 2 kingdoms weren't actively fighting each other, but it did mean that they weren't allies in times of need either. Anyway, to the south of the Visigothic kingdom, if you look past the water, we find Morocco, or back then, the Umayyad dynasty. And no, these weren't just another set of Islamic warlords. They were the world's superpower. Their empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the mountains of Persia. The capital of the Umayyads sat in Damascus, but they didn't originally come from there. The massive caliphate started under Prophet Muhammad, who started the lightning conquest from Saudi Arabia, and after many years of Islamic betrayals, the Umayyads turned the Prophet's mission into this massive imperial machine. And at the time, the Umayyads' eyes were focused on North Africa. The Arabs had pushed west for decades, overrunning Byzantine fortresses and forcing the local Berber tribes to convert and submit. Many of those Berbers accepted Islam and joined the New World Order. But that doesn't mean they were exactly friends with their Arab overlords. They were often treated as second-class Muslims by racist governors, which meant they were seen useful, expendable, and conveniently far away from Damascus. This was especially useful for the current Umayyad governor of North Africa, Musa bin Nusayr, who now had tens of thousands of new recruits. But it also brought a new issue to the table, because the new recruits were promised wealth, divine retribution, and all that fancy stuff. But all they got was laughable battles with rogue mountain tribes. They yearned for something big and economically worth it. So the governor looked across the waters of Maghreb and noticed the Visigoth kingdom. To give you some context, the Umayyads believed they had the divine duty to expand Islam into every land that wasn't yet under Allah's rule. That duty has a name, jihad. Though today that word is loaded with politics and fear, back then it simply meant holy war, to spread the faith, enforce Allah's justice, and bring the non-Muslims under submission. You know, as a Christian, that sounds horrible. Let's just make sure these jihadists don't get anywhere close to our... Oh my god, they're here already! Before the Christian Visigoths even realized what was happening, sails were already dotting the southern horizon. In 711, a Berber general named Tariq bin Ziyad crossed the narrow strait with an army of around 7,000 men. Think of it as a bunch of Berbers, a few costly Arabs, and many black banners of the Umayyads waving around. The army landed on a steep, rocky cliff, which would later be named Tariq's Mountain, though today it is known as Gibraltar. Tariq's men came fast, quiet, and terrifyingly well supplied to battle, mainly due to a Christian noble who wanted revenge against the disputed King Roderick. So he gave the invaders plenty of weapons, food, and horses. And Tariq, he was going all or nothing into this campaign. Since the moment his forces landed, he supposedly ordered his own ships to be burned, just to make sure no one got any bright ideas about going home. He turned towards the army and screamed, "Behind you is the sea, before you is the enemy. You have nothing left but your faith and your swords." Now, historians aren't sure if he actually said that, but considering what happened next, he might as well have. Because up north, King Roderick had a bigger problem than a quote-unquote minor Berber raid. Because while he was reading the news about the brutes down south, the court jester stole his precious jewelries. Luckily, since he is King Roderick, he is both judge, jury, and executioner. But the common people, like the jester who actually didn't do a single thing, isn't that lucky. That's where our sponsor Morgan & Morgan comes in. There's a reason you don't cross an ocean without a plan, just like there's a reason why Morgan & Morgan is America's largest injury law firm. They've been fighting for the people for over 35 years. Think of them as your own personal army. They have over 1,000 lawyers and 100 offices nationwide. And they have recovered over $30 billion for their clients. Best yet, their fee is free unless they win. If you are ever injured due to someone else's negligence, you can check out Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/historically, or you can click the link in the description to find out more. So yeah, half the Visigothic nobles hated him, and the other half wasn't sure if he was truly the rightful king. But as reports of Muslim landings piled up, King Roderick decided he could no longer ignore it, and employed the classic battle tactic of amassing a giant army, yeeting them towards the enemy, and hopefully return home victorious to convince everyone you are the rightful king after all. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the Umayyad governor Musa was chilling, thinking that Tariq was about to employ a small operation for the empire. In reality, however, which no one expected from the Berber general, he was about to take down an entire kingdom. The Christian and Muslim armies met near a river in the south of the kingdom. On one side, we had Roderick and his massive Visigothic army. Tens of thousands of armored warriors, nobles, and additional conscripts all fighting under the cross. On the other side, there was the Umayyad army, which was way smaller, much less armored, and mainly Berbers who were told this is their chance to prove themselves in front of Allah. And while they're at it, maybe loot a few cities. It should have been an easy win for the Visigoths. They outnumbered the invaders, had home advantage, and Roderick was so confident he would win that he arrived in full royal bling bling. But guess what? Having an army doesn't automatically mean that the politics are on your side. Remember, half the nobles were basically rooting for the king to fail, to the point that apparently some of the nobles' armies switched mid-fight, and the others just straight up left. The result was pure chaos for the Christians, and Roderick's line of command broke down. You can probably guess what happened next. Tariq's small force was outnumbered 3-1, yet absolutely crushed the Visigothic army. King Roderick's body was never found. Some reports said that he drowned in the river they fought in. Others claimed he was simply chopped into pieces by the enemy cavalry. Point is, the king was gone, and with him, so was the Visigothic kingdom that existed for 300 years. General Tariq, realizing how big this victory was, wasted no time. His army continued to sweep north. Within months, they had taken Cordoba, Granada, and even Toledo, the Visigothic capital. Every town that surrendered was spared and heavily taxed. The towns who were stubborn, on the other hand, got spanked for being naughty. Now imagine the reaction of Governor Musa when he heard what his general managed to do without his supervision. It was supposed to be a small reconnaissance mission, not a whole conquest. He quickly assembled his own army and sailed north to join the fun also. Partly to make sure Damascus didn't think his subordinate became the new hero of Islam. And by 718, just 7 years after that first landing, nearly the entire Iberian Peninsula was under Muslim control. The place needed a new name, of course, so they called it Al-Andalus, which meant the land of the Vandals. Though the Christian locals probably called it something closer to the end of the world. The Umayyads were hyped. Their divine mission to spread Islam had worked. Jihadists managed to erase one of the oldest Christian kingdoms in just a couple years. And when you got that kind of momentum going, you don't just stop there. Next up was the Frankish kingdom, those filthy Christian baguette people. In the year 720, the Umayyads stared at the Pyrenees, those big stinky mountains that separated the empire from the Franks. So naturally, they crossed them. Led by legendary commanders with very difficult names, Muslim armies surged north into Septimania, aka southern France. They swiftly captured Narbonne, raided Bordeaux, and began inching closer and closer to the heart of Gaul. While all of that was going on, Al-Andalus was surprisingly thriving. New cities began rising from Roman ruins. The crumbling Visigothic order was replaced by the classic Arabic administration. And most importantly, trade absolutely exploded for the first time in centuries, as the Umayyad province was now connected to the wealth of the wider Islamic world. Back to the Franks though, because they were getting nervous. And by nervous, I mean extremely anxious. They just started rebuilding their own little patchwork kingdom after centuries of chaos. The man who kept it all together, and basically the ruler, was Charles Martel, who wasn't even the king or anything, he was simply the CEO of the army. When he heard that the Muslims were pillaging the way up from Bordeaux, Charles decided they endured enough bullying. So in 732, it was time for Christians versus Muslims Part 2. The two armies met between the cities of Tours and Poitiers, and what followed became one of the most mythologized battles in European history. The Muslim army was large, fast, and had cavalry that could tear through anything short of a miracle. The Franks, on the other hand, were an infantry-heavy army. I'm talking disciplined, armored, and extremely determined soldiers who were far from eager to become yet another Umayyad tax province. Charles positioned his troops on a wooded hill, formed a dense shield wall, and just waited. Not for a couple hours, but an entire week. During all that time, both armies just stood there, menacingly. When the Muslims finally grew bored and decided to attack, they slammed into the wall of shields. Wave after wave rammed against the Frankish defense line. And somehow, in that chaos, the Umayyad commander was killed. That single moment flipped the entire battle. The Muslim army panicked, having lost their commander, and retreated under the cover of the night back to Al-Andalus. This moment, according to Christian chronicles, was the moment Europe was saved, and Charles Martel, nicknamed Charles the Hammer, became a hero. The Muslims called it a tactical retreat, the Christians called it a divine victory, and everyone agreed that invading France wasn't worth the effort. Let someone else have that fun later. By the mid-700s, a line was drawn. To the south, Al-Andalus, which was rich, thriving, and Muslim. And to the north, the patchwork of Christian realms. Battered, but alive. Interestingly though, in between those two superpowers, a spark of resistance began to form. Even though the Iberia was now under Muslim control, a few Christian households managed to survive the storm in the northern mountains. And in those misty valleys, a legend began to take shape. The Visigothic Christians aren't defeated. They are merely waiting for the Reconquista. The Muslim governors of Al-Andalus were busy carving up their new prize, so they didn't pay much attention to the scruffy mountain folk up north. Because, let's face it, what could a few hundred starving shepherds possibly do against the Caliph's empire, right? Well, surprise. In the rough mountains of Asturias, a Visigothic noble, or depending on who you ask, a local warlord named Pelayo, had refused to surrender. He'd seen his kingdom fall, his fellow nobles defect, the churches burn, and decided that he was not about to pay tax to the guys who just invaded. He gathered a few hundred followers. Think ex-soldiers, stubborn farmers, monks, and anyone else who could swing a sword, and ventured deep into the valleys. That little pocket of resistance became the seat of something entirely new, the Kingdom of Asturias. Now, to be clear, kingdom is generous. It was more like a handful of huts, a church, and a very optimistic cave. But it was independent, and that made it dangerous for the Umayyads. So, 2 years after the invasion of France, the Umayyads decided to snuff it out. They sent a small task force north, expecting an easy win. You know, just another tax collection day. The Umayyads marched into Covadonga, a narrow mountain pass surrounded by steep cliffs. And just out of sight, Pelayo and his men were waiting, patiently. When the Muslims walked in deep enough, the Christian resistance rained rocks, arrows, and every curse word in early medieval Spanish on them. The terrain turned it from a fight into a one-sided massacre. The Muslim force fled, and Pelayo, the man nobody took serious, had just pulled off the first Christian victory in Muslim Spain. Now, let's not overhype it, of course. Maybe a few hundred soldiers died on each side, and this small skirmish didn't change anything on the map, but it did reinforce the legend about the Christians in the mountains. The victory became a Christian household tale, and perhaps proof that Allah's empire wasn't invincible after all. The Battle of Covadonga is, according to many, the official start of the Reconquista. Pelayo was crowned the first king of Asturias. His people started rebuilding, fortifying, praying, and breeding. Mostly the last one, because within a few generations, the tiny cave kingdom of Asturias would become the base of something much bigger. The Muslims didn't exactly lose sleep over losing to some mountain hermits. But even if they did, they had a way bigger problem at hand. Because right now, their own empire was literally imploding. Back in Damascus, the Umayyad Caliphate, that giant empire stretching from Spain to India, had made a lot of enemies. Between corrupt governors, angry non-Arab Muslims, and every family feud possible, things finally boiled over in 750, when a rival clan, the Abbasids, overthrew the Umayyads in a spectacular bloodbath. The new Abbasid rulers moved the capital east to Baghdad, effectively abandoning the far-off province of Al-Andalus. But one Umayyad prince, Abdul Rahman, managed to escape the Abbasid massacre. After many months of hiding and running for his life, he crossed the Mediterranean, landed in Spain and thought, well, everyone here is already Umayyad anyway, revive the empire. So in 756, Abdul Rahman declared himself Emir of Cordoba, and by doing so created an independent Muslim state, no longer loyal to Baghdad, now loyal to just himself. We made 2 videos on the guy, and his story, by the way, is frankly incredible and worth a watch later after this video. This little act of defiance turned Al-Andalus from a distant colony to a self-sufficient power. And under the new Emirate of Cordoba, Al-Andalus became one of the most advanced societies in Europe. They built libraries that dwarfed anything north of the Pyrenees, introduced irrigation, citrus, algebra, and architecture that made medieval Europeans look like fools. Even some Christian scholars started heading south to study Arabic philosophy, and probably eat something else that wasn't salted pork for once. Meanwhile, up north, the kingdom of Asturias was slowly crawling out of its cave phase. Pelayo was dead, but his successors pushed west into Galicia and east into Leon. Those were tiny steps, more like land reclamation than conquest, but they mattered. Every hill, every valley retaken became part of the holy propaganda, proof that God was still on their side. By the late 800s, a kind of cold war had settled over the peninsula. The little mountain refuge of Asturias had evolved into the Kingdom of Leon, now ruling most of the northwest. From there, new offshoots began to form. Castile in the center, Navarre in the Pyrenees, Aragon farther east. Each had its own kings, its own squabbles, and one shared goal: push south. Back down in Al-Andalus, the Muslims in the meantime had their own glow-up moment. Under Abdul Rahman III, who came to power in 912, Cordoba became a literal beacon of wealth and learning. He stabilized the borders, crushed rebellions, expanded trade with North Africa, and in 929 went a step further, proclaiming himself no longer Emir, but Caliph of Cordoba, essentially equalizing the country to the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. A legendary win for the Muslim world. But naturally, even golden ages come with cracks. The Caliphate's prosperity depended on unity. Arab elites, Berber soldiers, local converts, and Jewish administrators all working together. And if there is one thing the Iberian Peninsula hates more than peace, it's cooperation. When Abdul Rahman III and his brilliant son Al-Hakam II died, the Muslim system started to wobble. And shortly after, in the year 1009, Cordoba descended into a Muslim civil war. A brutal power struggle that tore the caliphate apart. And as a result, not even 20 years later, Al-Andalus had shattered into dozens of taifas. Independent Muslim city-states that were constantly undermining each other. In short, the south was burning itself down. Meanwhile, the Christians in the north smelled the opportunity. Their enemy had just split into 20 different pieces. And in a scenario like that, even a cave kingdom can start dreaming big. It was finally time for the Uno reverse. Leon, Navarre, Castile, and Aragon began pushing south, taking fortresses one by one. If you are a Christian, you are probably super hyped right now, but it wasn't an epic steamroll battle. It was more like a centuries-long slow grind. Like a really long chess match of raids, sieges, marriages, and betrayals. Now don't get me wrong, because the Christian forces wanted it to take long, because their biggest ally at the moment was time itself. Remember, the taifas didn't just fight the northern kingdoms, they were also fighting each other. Every Muslim prince wanted to taste the glory of being the next caliph. Every city wanted to outshine Cordoba's ghost. And when things got too hot between the Muslims, some of them did the most counterproductive thing possible. They paid the Christian kings for protection. Yes, really. Muslim rulers in Spain were funding the armies that were literally praying for their downfall. By the 1080s, the tide was turning hard. The Christian kingdoms were stronger, richer, and far more organized. Castile emerged as the dominant force under King Alfonso VI, who in 1085 pulled off a major flex. He captured Toledo, the old Visigothic capital. That one hit different. It was the first great city retaken for Christendom, and it sent a message as clear as a church bell. The Reconquista wasn't a legend anymore. It was happening. Down south, the Taifas panicked, so they called for help, and from across the strait came new players. The Almoravids, a hardline Muslim dynasty from North Africa, cloaked in black veils, mounted on camels, and preaching strict Islamic law. They crossed the Strait of Gibraltar like the Umayyads had 3 centuries before. Except this time to save Al-Andalus, not conquer it. At first, they did well. In 1086, the Almoravids crushed Alfonso VI at the Battle of Zagayas, halting the Christian advance for an entire generation. But, and I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, power corrupts fast in the Iberia. Within decades, the Almoravids softened, splintered, and lost their zeal. And soon enough, they themselves needed saving. So another stricter movement replaced them, the Almohads. The Almohads made the Almoravids look like hippies. They rebuilt the Southern Empire, enforced puritanical Islam, and even pushed north again. In 1195, they handed the Christians a major defeat yet again. For a moment, it looked like history might repeat itself, that the cross would crumble before the crescent again. But then came 1212. United for once under a rare moment of Christian cooperation, Castile, Aragon, Navarre, even crusaders from France met up and faced the Almohad army at Las Navas de Tolosa, deep in Al-Andalusian hills. The battle was brutal, chaotic, and decisive, often credited by scholars as the Battle of the Two Fates. Whoever would win was going to rule over the Iberian Peninsula. Naturally, in a decisive war, whether we like it or not, one has to win. And the winners were the Christians. The Christians broke through the Almohad camp and shattered their army. That was the moment Al-Andalus truly began to fall apart for good. Over the next century, the Christian rolled south, swallowing cities like Cordoba in 1236, Valencia in 1238, and Seville in 1248. By the mid-1200s, Muslim Spain was gone. Almost. Only one last kingdom held out, Granada. Granada, tucked beneath the Sierra Nevada mountains, was the last jewel of Al-Andalus. Small, wealthy, and clever enough to survive by diplomacy. Its rulers, the Nasrids, paid tribute to Castile, married their daughters into Christian courts, and essentially made sure the Reconquista didn't finish for a whopping 200 extra years. 200 years of walking on political tightropes. But every rope frays eventually. By the late 1400s, the Christian kingdoms had united under Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, aka the famous Catholic monarchs. Their marriage merged Spain into one superstate. The Kingdom of Granada became their honeymoon prize. In 1482, the Catholic monarchs launched a 10-year campaign to finish what Pelayo had started 7 centuries earlier. Fortress by fortress, valley by valley, they closed the noose around the city. Finally, on January 2nd, 1492, under the shadow of the Alhambra Palace, the last Muslim ruler handed over the keys to the city to Ferdinand and Isabella. After 781 years, the Reconquista was finally over! The crescent lowered, the cross raised. Spain was whole, or at least that's what they told themselves. In reality, it was the end of one era and the violent birth of another. Because that same year, in 1492, a certain Italian sailor named Christopher Columbus sailed west under their flag, carrying the same fire of conquest that had burnt across Iberia for 8 centuries, ready to plant it in America. But that's for another video. So, make sure to subscribe! Also, next video is going to be a whopping 40 minutes long, and as always, will be released to members first. So, if you want to support us and to get sick benefits, become a member today.